The morning was still quiet, and I stood in my driveway with a wrench in my hand, staring at the van I had spent 6 months building with my own hands. The sun had just risen, the air thick with dew, and the scent of engine oil hung in the cool breeze. The van was supposed to be my escape, my quiet plan to disappear for a while. Inside, it was more than just a vehicle. It was my little sanctuary. A small wooden bed, a cabinet I had sanded until my arms ached, and curtains I stitched myself because I didn't trust anyone else to get it right. I had poured myself into this project, hoping it would take me somewhere I could forget for a while. I was 28, living alone in a rental house in northern Vermont. It was a peaceful place, but somehow it felt too small for the dreams I kept locked away. For 3 years, I had barely spoken to the woman who lived next door. Her name was Diane, and she was 43, though I had only learned that once, overhearing her laugh about needing reading glasses. She had dark blonde hair, usually pulled back into a low ponytail, and wore simple clothes, jeans, hoodies, and jackets that looked worn in a comfortable way. She taught ceramics at the community college, and I knew that because every Monday morning, I would watch her load boxes of clay into her sedan. Her life seemed so different from mine, so steady, and I couldn't help but notice her from my kitchen window more often than I probably should have. That morning, as I was tightening bolts and checking oil, I saw her standing on her porch, a ceramic mug in her hands. Steam rose from it, mixing with the cool air, and she was watching me, her eyes thoughtful. "Big trip?" she called, her voice low and rough from sleep. I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked up, offering a quick nod toward the van. "Yeah," I said, finally finished. "I'm heading to the coast, maybe down to North Carolina. I've got a couple of months before my next freelance job starts." She looked over the van, her gaze taking in the bike rack, the solar panel, the open door. "That's really something," she said. I should have said something simple like, "Thanks," and walked away. But then the words slipped out before I could stop them. "If you were my age, I'd take you on a road trip." The moment they left my mouth, I knew I had said something I couldn't take back. I saw the way her eyes shifted, the way the air between us thickened with a sudden, undeniable tension. She didn't react right away. She took a sip of her coffee, then, slowly, almost deliberately, looked me in the eye. "What are we waiting for?" she asked. My heart did something funny in my chest, and my hand froze around the wrench. "What?" I asked, not sure if I'd heard her right. "You're leaving this morning, right?" she clarified. "Yeah, in about an hour." She nodded once, as if deciding something, then turned and walked back toward her house. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice steady. The door closed softly behind her. I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at her porch, my heart pounding in my chest like it might burst. This was not how it was supposed to go. The plan had been simple: leave alone, drive until I felt like stopping, and disappear for a while. But now it seemed like that plan was already falling apart. I went back to the van, pretending to work. I tightened a bolt that was already tight. I checked the oil again. I stalled. Part of me hoped she wouldn't come back outside. Part of me was terrified she wouldn't. 20 minutes later, her door opened again. She walked down the steps, carrying a canvas duffel bag and a backpack. She was wearing hiking boots, a jacket, and her hair was still tied back. She looked calm, almost too calm. "Are you sure?" I asked when she reached me, still trying to wrap my head around this unexpected twist. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" I hesitated, wondering if I should laugh it off, say it was a joke, let her walk away, and pretend this hadn't happened. But when I looked at her, I didn't want to do that. "Yeah," I said, "I'm sure." She handed me her bag. Our fingers brushed for just a second, but it felt like more. A small spark. She climbed into the passenger seat like it was nothing, like it was completely normal for her to be here, beside me. I slid into the driver's seat, the engine sputtering to life before settling into a steady hum. I glanced at her. She was staring ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've got coffee," she said, pulling out a red thermos. "If you want some." I nodded, and she poured me a cup. It was hot and strong, exactly how I liked it. Perfect. For the first hour, we didn't say much. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was careful, like we were both trying to figure out what was happening without admitting it out loud. At a gas station, she bought some trail mix and water. She offered me some, and our fingers almost touched as I reached for the bag. I thought about how this was nothing like the quiet, solo road trip I had planned. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why did you say that about my age?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "I don't know. I think I was trying to say something without saying it." Quote. She was quiet for a long time, then asked, "Like what?" I glanced at her, my heart doing something funny again. "That I think about you more than I should." She didn't say anything at first, but I could feel her eyes on me, steady and unwavering. Then, in a voice so soft, it almost seemed like a confession, she said, "I almost didn't come." I stood in my kitchen thinking I was being ridiculous. "What changed your mind?" I asked, trying not to sound too curious, too hopeful. She took a deep breath. "I decided I would rather be ridiculous than safe." By midday, we were deep into New Hampshire, the road stretching out in front of us, narrowing as the trees closed in around us. The landscape was changing. No more open fields, just dense forest that seemed to swallow the road whole. Diane leaned back in her seat, humming softly to the music I had put on, a song that made the whole world outside the van feel a little less heavy. The silence between us was different now, less careful, more comfortable. The kind of silence you settle into when you've spent enough time with someone to not feel the need to fill every gap with words. But even in that silence, something was shifting. I could feel it. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of the trip, not of what this was turning into. The van felt like more than just a vehicle now. It was a space that held us both, a little world of its own. It was where we could be without the weight of everything else. We stopped at a quiet overlook by a lake in Maine, the water still and calm, reflecting the sky like a giant mirror. The air was cool, but not too cold, and everything around us felt peaceful, as if we had stumbled into a place where time didn't matter. I looked over at Diane. She was watching the water, her hands folded in her lap, her hair loose around her shoulders. The weight of the moment hung between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was hopeful in a way, like maybe we had found something important even if we didn't fully understand it yet. "Are you okay with this?" she asked, turning to me. I nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "More than okay." She smiled back, small and real, and for a second, the world felt exactly right. We didn't need to explain anything. We didn't need to rush into anything. We were just there, together. That night, we camped under the trees, the fire crackling between us as the stars started to appear overhead. The night felt wide and endless, but I didn't feel small. Not with her beside me. I gave her a blanket, and we sat there for a while, the fire casting warm light on her face, her eyes reflecting the flames. She turned to me, a question in her gaze, and the air between us seemed to hum with it. "You can sit closer," she said, her voice softer now, like she wasn't just talking about the physical space between us, but something else entirely. Without thinking, I moved closer, my side brushing against hers. We didn't speak for a while, just sat there in the quiet, watching the stars. But it felt like more than just watching. It felt like we were witnessing something together, like we were sharing it in a way that was hard to explain. I didn't realize until later how much that moment would mean to me, how much that small shift, her inviting me to sit closer, had changed everything. The fire burned low, and we eventually climbed into the van, the warmth from the blankets settling around us. Diane curled up next to me, her head resting against my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone, not in the way I had always felt before. The rain started in the early hours of the morning, steady and soft, tapping against the roof of the van. I woke up to the sound of it, feeling strangely comforted by it. Outside, everything felt gray and quiet, but inside, the van felt like the safest place in the world. I glanced over at Diane. She was still asleep, her hair loose and damp from the night air, the blanket wrapped around her like she was cocooned in it. It was strange. The world felt distant now, All the things I had been running from, all the plans I had made to escape, didn't seem to matter as much. What I had with Diane, it was enough. More than enough. I sipped my coffee, watching her for a moment longer, trying to memorize the way she looked in the soft morning light, her face, peaceful and relaxed. The way her breath came steady, like she didn't have to pretend for anyone. When she stirred and opened her eyes, she smiled at me, her gaze warm and steady, as if nothing had changed. As if we were just two people, sitting in the quiet of a van on a rainy morning, with no need for explanations. "Good morning," I said, my voice rough from sleep. She stretched, her movements slow and lazy, and then sat up, reaching for the thermos of coffee she had brought with us. She poured herself a cup, then handed it to me without a word. I took it, savoring the warmth. We drank in silence for a while, the rain falling steadily outside, keeping the world at bay. "I've been thinking," Diane said suddenly, breaking the silence. I glanced at her, setting the cup down in the cup holder. "About what?" "I don't usually do things like this," she began. "I plan everything. I make lists. This." She paused, looking out at the rain. "This wasn't on any list." I smiled softly, reaching over and squeezing her hand, my thumb brushing the back of her fingers. "It wasn't on mine either." She looked over at me, her eyes thoughtful, searching my face. "I don't know what happens after this trip," she said, almost to herself. But I knew I couldn't stay home and keep wondering. I was tired of wondering. Her words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for, because I understood that more than I wanted to admit. "I get it," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "I feel the same way." We sat there for a while longer, the rain outside softening, the world slowly waking up around us. Everything felt different, better. Like we had already started something that neither of us fully understood, but both of us needed. When the rain finally slowed, we packed up the campsite, working side by side in a quiet rhythm. Our hands brushed more often now, and neither of us pulled away. Back on the road, the van hummed steadily beneath us. I drove in silence, my thoughts wandering back to the moment we had shared. It was only a few hours later that I realized this wasn't just a trip. This was something that had already changed us both. We didn't rush as we continued down the road. The coast was still hours away, but it didn't matter. The journey had shifted from a simple road trip to something more. Something I couldn't quite define yet, but I knew it was important. By the time we crossed into Massachusetts, the sun was low, casting long shadows over the road. Diane was quiet again, staring out the window, her face illuminated by the soft golden light. I couldn't help but watch her, my thoughts drifting to the strange, sudden connection we had built in just a couple of days. It felt natural, like this had always been the way it was supposed to be, but there was a part of me that couldn't quite understand why it had happened so quickly. I glanced over at her and noticed her fingers resting lightly on her lap. Without thinking, I reached over and touched her hand gently, the warmth of her skin grounding me in the moment. She looked up at me, her eyes soft, and for a second we didn't need to say anything. We just existed together in that quiet space between us, and it felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced before. "Do you want to stop at the beach?" I asked, breaking the silence. "We're close." She smiled, a small, contented smile that made something inside me twist with something unspoken. "Yeah, I'd like that." We took the exit, driving down a winding road that led us to a small, hidden beach. There was nobody else there, just the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks and the distant call of seagulls. The air was salty and fresh, and I couldn't help but feel that we had stumbled into another world, far from the one we had left behind. I parked the van, and we got out, stretching our legs after hours of driving. The sand was cold beneath our feet, but the feeling of the ocean breeze against my face made it all worth it. We walked down to the water's edge, the waves brushing over our toes, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. "Do you ever think about how small we are compared to everything else?" Diane asked, her voice distant, almost lost in the sound of the waves. I glanced at her, surprised by the question. "I don't know," I said slowly, "but right now it feels like the world is big, but we're still here, together." She smiled again, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "Yeah, I guess you're right." We stood there for a while, not saying much, just watching the sun sink lower in the sky, painting the clouds with hues of pink and orange. The colors reflected in Diane's eyes, and I found myself lost in the way she seemed to absorb the world around her. I wanted to say something that would make everything clearer, something that would make this all feel less like a dream and more like something real, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe I didn't need to say anything. Maybe, in that moment, we both knew what it meant, without needing to speak it. We walked back to the van as the first stars began to appear, the evening sky turning dark and endless. The air had cooled, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. Diane did the same, her hair tumbling out of its ponytail, loose and wild from the wind. I started the engine, the sound of the van rumbling to life filling the quiet. Diane pulled out the thermos again, pouring us both fresh coffee, and we settled into a comfortable silence, the road stretching out ahead of us like it had no end. We didn't talk much that night. We drove in companionable silence, just letting the road lead us wherever it wanted. It felt like the world had stopped demanding things from us, and we could just be. By the time we reached a small town in Rhode Island, it was past midnight. We pulled into the parking lot of a bed and breakfast, its old sign creaking in the wind. The windows were dimly lit, and the porch swing gently swayed in the breeze. It looked like a place where time had slowed down, where nothing could interrupt the peace of the night. We walked inside, the warmth of the building wrapping around us like a comforting hug. The woman behind the counter gave us a tired but welcoming smile. "One room left," she said. "One bed." I glanced at Diane, unsure if she would be comfortable with it. But before I could say anything, she stepped forward, answering before I had a chance to. "We'll take it," she said, her voice calm, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The room was simple, with soft light spilling through lace curtains. There was a double bed with a white quilt, the walls lined with antique furniture. It felt cozy, almost intimate, and as I stood there, I realized that the night had become something else entirely. It wasn't just about the road trip anymore. It was about us, and the way everything had shifted in the span of 2 days. I cleared my throat, trying to break the tension. "I can sleep on the floor if you—" She cut me off with a look, raising an eyebrow. "We're adults. We can share a bed, if that's okay with you." I smiled, the nerves in my chest finally relaxing. "It's more than okay." Quote. She showered first, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet, trying to quiet the thousand thoughts racing through my mind. When she came out, wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweater, her hair still damp, I almost forgot how to breathe. I stood up to shower, my body humming with something I didn't quite understand. The cool water didn't calm me. It only made the tension between us more apparent. We walked to a diner for dinner, the warm light inside soft and inviting. We sat in a booth, and she reached across the table to cover my hand with hers. "This is perfect," she said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe it was. Maybe everything, this road trip, this moment, was perfect. The room felt different when we returned to the bed and breakfast, as if the world had slowed down just for us. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was comforting. We both knew something had shifted, but neither of us was ready to name it. She stepped into the room first, pulling the door softly behind her. I followed, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said yet. The bed was inviting, soft and warm, and for a moment I stood there, watching her move around the room like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her take off her jacket and hang it in the closet. My chest tightened at the way she moved, at how calm she was. The air felt thick with unspoken words, but neither of us reached for them. We didn't need to. "Not yet. Are you sure you're okay with this?" I asked quietly, the question hanging in the space between us. It was the first time I had said anything that felt like an invitation to change the course of the trip, to change whatever it was that was beginning between us. She paused for a moment, looking at me with those soft, steady eyes. "I'm more than okay," she said, and then smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made my heart skip. "Are you?" I didn't have to think about it. "Yeah," I said, my voice low and full of certainty. "I am." Quote, her smile softened, but there was something more in it now, something more than the kindness we'd shared before, something more personal, something real. We didn't speak much after that. We both knew what the other was feeling, knew the connection was there, undeniable, but too fragile to rush. And so we let it unfold slowly, naturally. Later, when we lay down in the bed, side by side, the space between us felt full in a way I couldn't explain. She had curled up, facing me, and I could feel her breath on my skin. I could hear her heartbeat, steady and calm, and I wanted to hold on to that feeling forever. The feeling of being close, of not needing to say anything to feel understood. For a long time, we just lay there in the quiet, both of us awake but unwilling to break the peace. Eventually, Diane shifted slightly, turning to face me fully, her eyes meeting mine in the dim light of the room. "Can I be honest with you?" she asked, her voice soft and vulnerable, like she wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. I nodded, the words already hanging in the air. "Of course." Quote, "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of you, but of how fast this feels, how fast it's all moving." My chest tightened at the vulnerability in her words. I reached for her hand, intertwining my fingers with hers, grounding her, grounding myself. "I'm scared too," I confessed, my voice just as quiet. "But I think sometimes slow doesn't mean careful. Sometimes it just means waiting too long." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, like she was trying to find the truth of what I had just said. Then, after a long moment, she smiled, a small, relieved smile that made something inside me settle. "I'm glad you said that," she said, her thumb brushing the back of my hand in that soft, familiar gesture that made everything feel so right. And just like that, it happened, slowly, gently, but inevitably. Our lips met, and the kiss was soft, tender, as if we were both afraid of moving too fast, but also afraid of stopping. I felt her warmth, the taste of coffee still lingering on her lips, and I couldn't help but kiss her deeper, unable to deny the pull that had been there from the start. When we pulled apart, my heart was racing, and the world outside the room felt distant, like it didn't matter. We didn't need to talk about what had just happened. We both knew that this was the start of something that couldn't be rushed, something that didn't need words. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We fell asleep beside each other, hands finding each other in the dark. There was no fear, no hesitation, just the feeling that we were right where we needed to be. The next morning I woke first, the room still quiet. The light from outside streamed through the curtains, soft and golden. Diane was still asleep, her head resting on my chest, her hair spilling over the pillow in soft waves. I stayed perfectly still, afraid to disturb the peace, afraid to wake up from this dream that felt so real. When she finally stirred, her eyes opening slowly, I smiled at her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Good morning," I said, my voice low and gentle. She smiled back, her eyes soft with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, her voice warm, and I could see it in her eyes. The same thing I was feeling, that quiet, undeniable connection. We didn't rush. We stayed there for a while, just holding each other, as if we both knew that the world could wait. Eventually we got up and got ready for the day, the silence between us comfortable, familiar. It was as if everything had shifted, and now there was no need for words. We were already understanding each other in ways that didn't need to be explained. We went to breakfast at a small cafe across the street, the same one we'd passed the night before. The warmth of the coffee filled the space between us, and I watched Diane, her eyes sparkling with something new, something that made my chest tighten with both excitement and fear. "I've been thinking," she said as she stirred her coffee, her voice thoughtful. "I don't know what happens after this trip, but I know I don't want it to end." I smiled, my heart pounding in my chest. "Neither do I," I said, the words coming out easier than I expected. We spent the rest of the morning walking around town, visiting the bookstores and cafes. There was no rush, no need for plans. We were just two people, walking side by side, discovering each other in the way that only a road trip like this could allow. When we finally left, we headed south again, the road stretching out before us like a promise. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. This trip had already changed everything, and as long as she was by my side, I was ready for whatever came next. The road felt different on the way back. There was a quiet urgency to it, a sense that we were returning to something, but not quite sure what that something was. The freedom we had felt on the road, the lack of plans and destinations, was beginning to feel like it was slipping through our fingers. Yet, every mile we drove brought us closer to the truth, closer to something real. As we made our way through the winding roads of New York, the sky above us darkened, and the rain began to fall. Slow at first, then heavier. The van's headlights cut through the mist, the sound of the tires on wet asphalt filling the space between us. I glanced over at Diane, who was sitting quietly beside me, her face illuminated by the soft light of the dashboard. "You okay?" I asked, my voice a little uncertain. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, taking my hand in hers. It was a small gesture, but it carried so much weight. Her touch grounded me in a way nothing else could. We didn't need words to explain how we were feeling. We both knew. "I'm good," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "Just thinking." "About what?" I asked, even though I had a feeling I knew the answer. We had been avoiding talking about the future for the entire trip, avoiding the one question that had been looming over us both since the beginning. What happens when we get home? Diane hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. "About how fast this all happened," she said finally. "About how everything just clicked." "I don't know, Marcus. I wasn't expecting this." I didn't expect to feel like this. I didn't know what to say. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just squeezed her hand gently, reassuring her, reassuring myself. "Me neither," I admitted. "But I'm glad it did. I'm glad it's us." She smiled at that, a small, warm smile that made my heart skip. "Yeah, me too." The rain picked up again, heavier now, a steady beat against the roof of the van. I turned on the radio, letting the quiet music fill the space between us as we drove in silence. There was no need for words anymore. We had said everything we needed to say in the moments we shared, in the small, quiet exchanges. I had stopped worrying about the road ahead. I was focused on the present, on Diane, on the way everything felt right, even though I hadn't planned for it to be this way. We stopped at a small roadside diner for dinner, a cozy little place with neon lights buzzing outside. The warmth inside was a welcome relief from the chill of the rain, and we found a booth by the window, the glow of the street lamp outside casting soft shadows on the table. We didn't talk about anything heavy, just the little things. The food, the weather, the random things we had seen on the road. It was comfortable, easy. But as we sat there, a quiet realization settled in, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. We were getting closer to the end of this trip, to the place where the road would stop, and we would have to face whatever came next. Diane was quiet for a moment, pushing her food around on her plate. Then she looked up at me, her expression more serious than I had seen it before. "Marcus," she began, her voice soft but steady, "what happens now?" I felt my heart skip, the weight of the question settling between us like a stone. I had known it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. I stared at her for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. "I don't know," I said finally. "I don't have any answers, Diane. But I know I don't want this to be over. I don't want to go back to how things were before." Her eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. "I don't want it to be over either," she said, her voice low. "But I think we both know that we have to figure out what comes next. We can't just keep running forever." "I know," I agreed, my chest tightening at the thought. "But I don't want to rush into anything. I don't want to lose this, not after everything." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers again. This time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just the simple act of being together, of sharing something real. "You're not going to lose it, Marcus," she said softly. We just need to figure out what we want. And somehow, in that moment, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't about having all the answers, about knowing exactly what would happen next. It was about taking it one step at a time, about letting things unfold as they were meant to. We didn't need to plan everything out. We just needed to trust in what we had found, trust in each other. The rest of the evening passed slowly, as if the world had decided to give us a little more time before we had to face whatever came next. We finished our meal, paid the check, and walked back to the van. The rain had let up by then, and the streets glistened with the wet reflections of the neon lights. We climbed into the van together, and as I started the engine, Diane settled into the passenger seat, her hand resting on the armrest between us. I glanced at her, offering a small smile. "You ready?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She nodded. "Yeah, let's go home." We drove in silence, the road stretching out before us like a promise. I didn't know what would happen when we reached the end of this trip, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't the end of us. Not by a long shot. The next morning we woke up early, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The van sat parked on the side of a quiet street, its windows fogged from the cold morning air. For a moment I didn't move, just lay there, listening to the soft sound of Diane's breath beside me, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. It was strange. In the short time we had been on the road, everything had shifted. The world outside the van felt distant, like it no longer had any power over what was happening between us. It was just us now. Us and the road ahead. We hadn't talked much after the diner the night before, just a few words exchanged between us as we drove. But it had been comfortable, easy. We both knew what was happening, even if we didn't have all the answers. There was no pressure. We didn't need to define anything. We were here, together, and that was enough. I turned to look at her, her face soft in the morning light, her hair still tangled from sleep. She looked peaceful, calm, like this was where she belonged, like this was where we both belonged. "You okay?" I asked quietly, unsure of what else to say. She smiled, her eyes still half closed from sleep. "Yeah, I'm better than okay." Quote. I chuckled softly, reaching over to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. "I was thinking we could head back home today," I said, my voice tentative, unsure of how she would take it. Not the end of the trip, but the end of this part anyway. She blinked up at me, her expression soft and understanding. "I think I'm ready to go home," she said, her voice steady. "But I don't want this to end, Marcus." I smiled, feeling something shift inside me at her words. I didn't want it to end either. I didn't want to go back to my old life, to the routines that felt so empty. I wanted this, whatever it was, to continue. "We'll figure it out," I said softly, reaching for her hand, intertwining our fingers. "One step at a time." She squeezed my hand in response, her grip warm and reassuring. "One step at a time," she repeated, her smile small but genuine. We spent the next hour packing up the van, taking down the small tent we had set up the night before, and folding the blankets neatly. It felt like the last little piece of the road trip, the last moment of freedom before we returned to reality. But it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. We had shared something real, and now we were ready to take it with us. When we were finished, we got into the van and started the engine. The road ahead stretched out before us, the promise of home in every turn. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. The drive home was easy. No rush, no need to hurry. We listened to music, talked about everything and nothing, laughed at silly things. We didn't talk about the future, about what would happen when we got back, because we both knew we didn't need to figure it all out right then. We were together, and that was enough. As we neared my house, I could feel the tension building between us. The road trip was almost over, but the trip, the journey, wasn't just about the destination. It was about everything we had learned along the way, about the way we had come together, step by step. When I pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and let out a slow breath. I didn't want this to be the moment where everything stopped. But it had to be, at least, for now. Diane looked over at me, her eyes soft but full of something that I couldn't quite place. She didn't say anything right away, just watched me, her gaze steady. "Well," she said finally, breaking the silence. "What now?" I looked at her, feeling my heart beat a little faster, unsure of what to say. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice quiet but sincere. She smiled, that same warm smile that had become my anchor over the past few days. "I want to keep doing this," she said simply. "I want to see where this goes." I nodded without hesitation, my heart swelling in my chest. "Yeah, me, too." She reached out, brushing her fingers against my cheek before leaning in, kissing me gently, slowly. It was the kind of kiss that spoke volumes, the kind that told you everything you needed to know without a single word. When we pulled apart, she didn't move right away. Instead, she stayed there for a moment, her forehead resting against mine. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. "I know," I whispered. "Neither am I." She smiled, and for the first time I realized that maybe this wasn't the end of the trip at all. Maybe this was just the beginning of something else. Something real, something lasting. She grabbed her bags and stepped out of the van, looking back at me before she turned to head inside. "I'll see you later?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be here." She waved as she walked to the door, and I watched her disappear inside, a sense of peace settling over me. The van felt empty, but I wasn't afraid of that emptiness anymore. I knew it wouldn't last long. The next morning I found myself standing in front of her door, a thermos of fresh coffee in my hand. I knocked softly, and when she opened the door, she smiled, her eyes lighting up when she saw the thermos. "You forgot this," I said, holding it out. She took it from me with a small smile, her eyes bright and playful. "I didn't forget it," she said. "I left it on purpose." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "Why?" Quote, "Because I knew you'd bring it back," she said, stepping aside to let me in. We sat at her kitchen table, coffee between us, our hands finding each other across the table. And in that moment, as we sat together, the future didn't seem scary anymore. It felt simple. "Where do we go from here?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, feeling the certainty settle in my chest. "Anywhere you want." She smiled, and I knew that no matter where we went, we would be going together.